The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Nora Calloway rode her dappled mare into Yankton, Dakota Territory, in the spring of 1876. Exhausted from her long journey, she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, ignoring the suspicious stares that followed her as she passed the saloon where raucous laughter spilled into the dusty street. The town she hoped would offer sanctuary already seemed poised to reject her before she'd even dismounted. Nora had fled St. Louis with nothing but her medical bag, a small trunk of possessions, and the desperate hope for a fresh start. At 26, she carried knowledge no proper lady should possess: herbs that could heal, tinctures that could cure, remedies passed down from her grandmother that the medical establishment dismissed as folklore and superstition. What they called witchcraft, she called mercy. "You lost, miss." A gruff voice called out as she slowed her horse near what appeared to be the town's only boarding house. Nora straightened her back, meeting the gaze of the elderly man who leaned against a wooden post. "No, sir. I'm exactly where I mean to be. I'm looking for lodging." The man's eyes narrowed as he took in her travel-worn appearance, lingering on the unusual leather satchel strapped to her saddle. "Mrs. Thatcher runs the place. Don't know if she's taking boarders." "Thank you," Nora replied, her voice measured despite her weariness. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness only invited trouble. The boarding house was a modest two-story structure with peeling white paint and a small porch. Nora tied her horse to the hitching post and gathered her most essential belongings before approaching the door. Her knock was answered by a plump woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun. "Yes." The woman's eyes swept over Nora with undisguised curiosity. "Good evening, madam. I'm looking for lodging. I've traveled far and would appreciate a room if you have one available. Mrs. Thatcher hesitated, her gaze dropping to the worn medical bag clutched in Nora's hand. "Where you coming from?" "St. Louis," Nora answered, offering nothing more. "And what brings you to Yankton? We don't get many unmarried ladies traveling alone." Nora had prepared for this. "I'm a nurse by training. I heard the Dakota Territory is in need of medical assistance." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had assisted doctors in St. Louis, but her true skills, the ones that had forced her to flee in the night, were the healing arts her grandmother had taught her, remedies drawn from nature that worked when conventional medicine failed. Mrs. Thatcher seemed to weigh her words. "A nurse, you say? Dr. Reynolds passed last winter." "Town's been without proper medical help since." She stepped aside. "I've got a room at the back. $5 a week includes breakfast and supper." "Thank you," Nora said, relief washing through her. "That would be suitable. There's a small stable out back for your horse." "I'll have my boy see to it." The woman's expression softened slightly. "You got a name?" "Nora Calloway." "Well, Miss Calloway, Yankton isn't St. Louis. Folks here are simple, God-fearing people. They work hard and mind their own business mostly. I suggest you do the same." Nora nodded, recognizing the warning in the woman's words. She'd heard similar cautions before. "I understand, Mrs. Thatcher. I'm simply looking for a quiet place to practice my healing." That night, after a simple meal of beef stew and cornbread eaten in silence while the other boarders, two elderly sisters, and a traveling salesman stole glances at her, Nora sat on the edge of her narrow bed and wondered if she had made another mistake. Yankton was smaller than she'd imagined, the kind of place where newcomers were noticed and whispers traveled fast. But she had nowhere else to go. Her parents were long dead, and the doctor she'd assisted in St. Louis had turned on her when desperate parents had begun seeking Nora's herbal remedies instead of his expensive and often ineffective treatments. The accusation of witchcraft had been whispered first, then spoken aloud, and Nora knew what followed such accusations. She unpacked her herbs carefully: yarrow for wounds, willow bark for fever, echinacea for infections, and dozens more. Some she had brought with her, others she would need to find in the wild lands surrounding Yankton. Her grandmother had taught her to read the land, to find medicine where others saw only weeds. It was a gift, she reminded herself, not a curse. As she drifted off to sleep, Nora prayed for acceptance in this new place, or at least tolerance. She'd settle for being left alone to practice her healing arts in peace. But peace was not what Yankton had in store for Nora Calloway. By the end of her first week, word had spread through town that a new nurse had arrived. Mrs. Thatcher, despite her initial reservations, had mentioned Nora's medical background to her friend whose daughter was suffering from a persistent cough. When traditional remedies failed, the desperate mother appeared at the boarding house. "Please," the woman whispered, glancing nervously at Mrs. Thatcher, who pretended not to listen from the kitchen. "My Emma's been coughing for weeks. Doctor in Sioux Falls says it's consumption, but I can't believe that. She's only 7. Nora hesitated only briefly before retrieving her medical bag. "I'll come see her." Emma's home was a small cabin on the outskirts of town. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of illness. The child lay on a pallet, her breathing labored, her small frame racked with coughing fits. Nora examined her carefully, noting the absence of the telltale blood that accompanied consumption. Instead, she recognized the wheezing breath and the way the girl struggled more at night, not consumption, but asthma, aggravated by the dusty prairie air and possibly an allergy. "I can help her," Nora told the mother, mixing a tincture of ephedra and honey. "This will ease her breathing. She should drink it 3 times a day." Within 2 days, Emma was sitting up and playing with her rag doll. Within a week, the coughing had all but disappeared. And Nora Calloway found herself with a line of townspeople at the boarding house door, seeking help for ailments that had plagued them for months or years. Mrs. Thatcher, seeing an opportunity, cleared out a small back room for Nora to use as an examination space. "Folks will pay what they can," she explained. "Some might bring eggs or milk instead of coin. That suit you?" Nora agreed, grateful for the chance to establish herself. But as her reputation for healing grew, so did the whispers. Some called her remedies miraculous, others called them unnatural. The town minister, a severe man named Reverend Blackwell, warned his congregation against seeking help from those who practiced pagan arts. "The devil tempts us with false cures," he thundered from his pulpit one Sunday. "Beware those who claim powers beyond God's ordained medicine." Nora, sitting at the back of the church in an attempt to integrate herself into the community, felt the stares burning into her back. She slipped out before the service ended, understanding that for some, her very presence was an affront to their beliefs. Yet for every person who crossed the street to avoid her, there were 2 who sought her help in secret. Women with female troubles that male doctors dismissed, children with fevers that wouldn't break, men with injuries that festered. Nora treated them all, asking only what they could afford to give. In late summer, when the prairie grasses turned golden and the harvest began, Nora was gathering herbs near the creek when she heard the pounding of hooves. A rider approached at breakneck speed, a small figure clutched before him on the saddle. "Help!" the man shouted as he spotted her. "For God's sake, help!" Nora rushed toward him as he reined his horse to a stop, nearly falling from the saddle in his haste to dismount. In his arms was a boy of about 10, deathly pale, his breathing shallow. "Snake," the man gasped, his face etched with terror. "Rattler bit him about an hour ago, been riding hard from our homestead." Nora took charge immediately. "Bring him to the shade," she instructed, leading them to a cottonwood tree by the water's edge. As the man laid the boy down, Nora examined the bite on the child's ankle, angry and swollen with 2 distinct puncture marks. "What's his name?" she asked, already reaching for her bag. "Joshua." "He's my son." The man's voice cracked. "I'm Preston Zimmerman. We've got a place about 10 miles north." Nora worked quickly, applying a poultice of plantain and yarrow to draw out the venom, then preparing a tincture of echinacea and goldenrod for the boy to drink. "This will help fight the poison," she explained, lifting Joshua's head so he could swallow the bitter liquid. "But we need to get him somewhere he can rest properly." Preston Zimmerman, a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky, looked at her with desperate hope. You're the healer they talk about in town. Some say you're," he stopped himself. "A witch," Nora supplied the word without flinching. "Is that what they say, Mr. Zimmerman?" "Some do," he admitted, his attention focused on his son's face. "Right now, I don't care what they call you. Just save my boy." They transported Joshua carefully to Nora's room at the boarding house. Mrs. Thatcher, upon seeing the gravity of the situation, helped prepare a pallet in the examination room and put water on to boil without a word of protest. Through the night, Nora sat with Joshua, applying fresh poultices, administering herbal teas to combat the fever that raged through his small body, and speaking softly to him when delirium made him cry out for his mother. Preston Zimmerman remained by his son's side, his large hands looking awkward as they smoothed the boy's sweat-soaked hair from his forehead. "His mama died birthing our second child," he explained quietly as dawn approached. "The baby too. Josh is all I have." Nora nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "He's fighting hard," she assured him. "The worst is past, I believe." By midday, Joshua's fever broke, and by evening he was awake and asking for water, when he managed to swallow a few spoonfuls of Mrs. Thatcher's chicken broth. Nora felt a weight lift from her chest. The boy would recover. Preston Zimmerman watched her with undisguised wonder as she checked his son's pulse and explained the healing process that was underway. "I don't know how to thank you," he said as Joshua drifted back to sleep, his breathing now deep and regular. "There's no need," Nora replied, gathering her supplies. "This is what I do." "Most doctors would have taken the leg if they could do anything at all," Preston insisted. "You saved more than his life. You saved his future." For the first time since arriving in Yankton, Nora felt truly seen not as a curiosity or a threat, but as a healer. The gratitude in Preston Zimmerman's eyes touched something within her that had been guarded for too long. "Your son needs rest," she said, uncomfortable with his praise. "He can stay here tonight. Tomorrow, if he's strong enough, you can take him home." Preston nodded, his gaze still fixed on her face. "I've heard what they say about you in town, but I know what I've seen with my own eyes." "You're no witch, Miss Calloway. You're an angel." Nora felt her cheeks warm at his words. "I'm neither, Mr. Zimmerman, just a woman who knows a bit about plants and healing." "Preston," he corrected gently, "and I think you're being modest. Whatever you want to call it, you've got a gift." Joshua recovered rapidly over the next few days, his youth and resilience working in his favor. When it was time for him and his father to return to their homestead, the boy hugged Nora fiercely. "Pa says you saved me," he said, his voice still weak but his eyes bright. "Says I'd have died for sure without you." "Your father helped too," Nora reminded him, touched by the child's gratitude. "He got you to me very quickly, and that made all the difference." Preston Zimmerman settled his account with Nora, insisting on paying more than she asked, despite his obvious means being modest. "We'll be back in town in a couple of weeks," he told her as he lifted Joshua onto his horse. "Maybe we could call on you, just to show you how well the boy's doing." Nora found herself smiling. "I'd like that." As summer gave way to autumn, Preston and Joshua Zimmerman became regular visitors to Yankton. Each time, they made a point of stopping by the boarding house to see Nora. Preston often brought small gifts, wild honey from the hives near his property, fresh game when his hunt was successful. Once even a small pouch of seeds he thought she might find useful for her remedies. Joshua, fully recovered and bursting with the energy of youth, would regale her with stories of life on their homestead, the new calf that had been born, the wolf tracks he'd discovered by the creek, the fort he was building in the old oak tree. Nora found herself looking forward to their visits, planning her trips into town to coincide with the days Preston mentioned they'd be coming in for supplies. Mrs. Thatcher noticed, of course. "That Zimmerman fellow's sweet on you," she observed one evening as Nora helped with the dishes after supper. "He's grateful, that's all," Nora demurred, though she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her whenever Preston appeared at the door, hat in hand, his smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Gratitude don't make a man ride 20 miles round trip every week with a boy who's fit as a fiddle, Mrs. Thatcher replied with a knowing look. And it don't make a woman wear her good dress on market day when she's just buying herbs. Nora had no response to that because the older woman was right. Something was growing between her and Preston Zimmerman, something tender and unexpected. But she was also acutely aware of the precariousness of her position in Yankton. The whispers about her witchcraft hadn't died down. If anything, her miraculous saving of Joshua Zimmerman had intensified them. Some now claimed she had made a pact with the devil to gain her healing powers. Others suggested she used Joshua's affliction as an opportunity to ensnare his widowed father. Reverend Blackwell had taken to mentioning the dangers of false prophets and healers in nearly every sermon, his gaze often finding Nora if she dared attend Sunday services. Several prominent families refused her services outright, even as they watched their loved ones suffer from ailments she could easily treat. When autumn brought a wave of influenza to Yankton, the divisions deepened. Those who trusted Nora's remedies recovered quickly. Those who refused them often languished for weeks, or, in the case of the elderly and very young, succumbed to the illness. They'd rather die than accept help from a woman they've decided is in league with Satan, Nora confided to Preston during one of his visits, her frustration boiling over after learning that the miller's young daughter had died the previous night, a child she could have saved with her elderberry syrup and echinacea tincture. Preston's expression darkened. It's ignorance, nothing more. They fear what they don't understand. Understanding wouldn't matter to Reverend Blackwell, Nora replied bitterly. He's determined to see me gone from Yankton. Then perhaps you should consider going elsewhere, Preston suggested, his voice careful. Not away entirely, but Joshua and we've got plenty of room at our place. It's modest, but the land is good. You could grow your herbs there, practice your healing without the town breathing down your neck. Nora stared at him, understanding slowly dawning. Mr. Zimmerman, are you suggesting I come live at your homestead, unchaperoned? A flush crept up Preston's neck. Not exactly, I'm suggesting. That is, I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife. The proposal, blunt and unadorned as it was, took Nora's breath away. Preston, we barely know each other. I know you saved my son's life. I know you're the most compassionate, determined woman I've ever met. I know Joshua adores you. He took a deep breath. And I know that I think about you every day when we're apart. Nora's heart raced. The idea wasn't unwelcome, far from it. In the month since she'd met Preston Zimmerman, she'd found herself drawn to his quiet strength, his devotion to his son, the gentle way he treated everyone around him. But marriage, now, this isn't just about getting me away from town gossip, is it? She asked, searching his face. Preston shook his head firmly. No, though I won't deny it would solve that problem, but I'd be asking even if the whole town thought you hung the moon. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I'm asking because I think we could build something good together, for Joshua. For us, Nora's throat tightened with emotion. I care for you both deeply, but marriage is a serious step. I'm a serious man, Preston replied, a rare smile softening his features, and I don't make offers I don't mean to keep. Before Nora could formulate a response, the boarding house door burst open and Mrs. Thatcher appeared, her face flushed with exertion. Miss Calloway, come quick, it's the Hendersons' baby. The fever's so high they can't wake her. Nora was on her feet instantly, reaching for her medical bag. I'll be right back, she told Preston, squeezing his hand. We'll finish this conversation, I promise. But the conversation would have to wait. The Henderson baby's fever was dangerously high, and it took all of Nora's skill and knowledge to bring it down. By the time the infant was resting comfortably in her mother's arms, night had fallen, and Preston and Joshua had returned to their homestead. The next morning brought chaos to Yankton. The influenza that had been spreading through town had reached the school, and half the children were ill. Nora worked tirelessly, moving from home to home, administering her remedies, instructing parents on how to reduce fevers and ease breathing. It was 3 days before she returned to the boarding house for more than a change of clothes and a few hours' sleep. And when she did, she found a letter waiting for her, delivered by the general store owner who had seen Preston in town. "My dear Miss Calloway," it read in Preston's careful handwriting, "Joshua and I have returned home, but my question remains. I understand you have important work in town right now, but when you're ready, we'll be waiting for your answer. Whatever it may be, know that you have my respect and admiration. Yours sincerely, Preston Zimmerman." Nora pressed the letter to her heart, torn between her growing feelings for Preston and her commitment to the people of Yankton who needed her, even those who feared her. The influenza epidemic worsened before it improved. By mid-October, nearly every household in Yankton had been affected. Nora worked alongside the town's only other medical practitioner, an elderly former Army surgeon named Dr. Calloway, who had initially viewed her with skepticism, but had come to respect her knowledge when her herbal remedies proved effective where his conventional treatments failed. "Never seen anything like your elderbark tonic," he admitted gruffly as they left the Cooper home where 3 children were now recovering. "Wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't watched those fevers break myself." "Elderberry," Nora corrected gently, "and it's an ancient remedy." "My grandmother taught me," Dr. Calloway harumphed. "Well, your grandmother knew what she was about. Shame she's not here. We could use another pair of hands." The acknowledgement from a medical professional meant more to Nora than all the grateful thanks from the families she'd helped. Perhaps, she thought, this was the beginning of acceptance. But Yankton was not ready to embrace Nora Calloway fully. As the epidemic began to wane, the deaths it had caused, particularly among those who had refused Nora's remedies, needed explanation. And for some, the explanation was clear. The witch had brought sickness to punish those who wouldn't accept her dark magic. The whispers turned to open accusations when Reverend Blackwell's wife succumbed to the influenza, despite Dr. Calloway's best efforts. The Reverend, wild with grief and rage, stormed into the general store where Nora was purchasing supplies. "Murderess," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You brought this plague upon us. My Martha is dead because of your evil." The store fell silent, customers backing away from the confrontation. Nora stood her ground, though her heart pounded with fear. "I'm sorry for your loss, Reverend," she said quietly, "but I had nothing to do with your wife's illness." The influenza came to Yankton as it has to towns all across the territory. "Lies," Blackwell's face contorted with fury. "You were seen gathering your witch's herbs just before the sickness began. You conjured this evil." Several townspeople murmured in agreement. Nora felt the atmosphere in the store shift dangerously. "Reverend Blackwell," she tried again, "I gather herbs to heal, not harm. I've spent weeks trying to save as many as I could to cover your tracks," he interrupted. "To make yourself appear innocent while you strike down those who see through your deception." The store owner, a practical man named Williamson, stepped forward. "Now, Reverend, that's hardly fair. Miss Calloway's been working day and night helping folks. My own grandchildren would have died without her remedies." But Blackwell was beyond reason. "She has bewitched you too, then. Can't you see? This woman is not what she appears to be." The tension in the store was building to a dangerous level when the door swung open and Preston Zimmerman strode in, Joshua at his heels. He took in the scene in an instant. Nora, pale but resolute, Reverend Blackwell, shaking with rage, the townsfolk uncertain and fearful. "What's happening here?" Preston's voice cut through the murmurs. "Justice," Blackwell spat. "This witch has brought death to our town and she must answer for it." Preston moved to Nora's side, his presence solid and reassuring. "The only thing Miss Calloway has brought to Yankton is healing. My son would be dead without her, and so would many others in this room, I'd wager." "Your judgment is clouded, Zimmerman," Blackwell said dismissively. "Everyone knows you've been courting her. She's bewitched you worst of all." Joshua, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. "Miss Nora isn't a witch," he declared with the simple conviction of a child. She saved me when the snake bit me. A witch would have let me die. The boy's innocent logic gave some of the onlookers pause. Nora felt a surge of gratitude for both Zimmermans standing beside her. "I understand your grief, Reverend," Preston continued in a measured voice. "Losing your wife is a terrible blow. I know that pain all too well, but blaming Miss Calloway won't bring her back, and it won't help this town heal." For a moment, it seemed as though Preston's words might reach through Blackwell's rage. The Reverend's shoulders sagged and grief overtook anger on his face. But then he straightened, his expression hardening once more. "The scripture is clear about those who practice witchcraft. 'Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. This woman must leave Yankton, or there will be consequences.'" With that, he turned and strode from the store, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. "Well," Mr. Williamson said after a moment, "that was unpleasant. You all right, Miss Calloway?" Nora nodded, though she felt anything but all right. "Yes, thank you. Don't you mind the Reverend," an elderly woman who had been quietly observing spoke up. "Grief makes folks say terrible things. He'll come around." But Nora wasn't so sure. The look in Reverend Blackwell's eyes had been one of absolute conviction, and she knew from bitter experience how quickly such conviction could turn a community against someone like her. Preston's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Let me take you back to the boarding house," he offered. "You look exhausted." Nora couldn't deny it. Weeks of tending to the sick, combined with the constant strain of the town's suspicion, had drained her. She nodded gratefully. As they walked through town, Nora was acutely aware of the stares that followed them. Some were sympathetic, others wary, a few openly hostile. Preston seemed to notice too, his jaw tightening as he guided her through the street. "This isn't going to get better, is it?" she asked quietly when they were out of earshot of passers-by. Preston sighed. "I wish I could say it would, but Blackwell has influence here, and fear spreads faster than reason." They reached the boarding house, where Mrs. Thatcher met them at the door with a concerned expression. "I heard about what happened at the store," she said, ushering them inside. "Reverend Blackwell's been by here too, telling me I shouldn't harbor a witch under my roof." Nora's heart sank. "Mrs. Thatcher, I would never bring trouble to your door. If you want me to leave—" "Nonsense," the older woman interrupted firmly. "I told him in no uncertain terms that who I board is my business, not his. Besides, my rheumatism hasn't troubled me once since you made me that willow bark salve." She patted Nora's hand. "You're staying right here." Relief flooded through Nora. At least she still had one ally in town. "Miss Calloway will be staying with us at the homestead," Preston announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. Both women turned to look at him in surprise. "I haven't agreed to that," Nora reminded him. "It's not safe for you here," Preston insisted. "Not with Blackwell stirring up trouble. At least at our place, you'd be away from his influence." Mrs. Thatcher looked between them, a knowing expression crossing her face. "Well, I suppose that would solve things if it's a proper arrangement." "Of course it would be proper," Preston replied, his cheeks coloring slightly. "I've asked Miss Calloway to marry me." "Preston," Nora exclaimed, embarrassed by his bluntness. "Well, I have," he said defensively, "and I'm still waiting for an answer." Mrs. Thatcher suppressed a smile. "I'll leave you two to discuss that particular matter. But Mr. Zimmerman is right about one thing, Miss Calloway. Things might get uncomfortable for you in town for a while." After the landlady had retreated to the kitchen, Nora turned to Preston. "I can't just run away because things are difficult. The people here need me, especially now." "I admire your dedication," Preston said softly, "but I'm worried about your safety. Blackwell isn't just angry, he's dangerous, and he's convincing others to share his view." Joshua, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "Please come with us, Miss Nora. We've got a nice house and you can grow all your plants there, and Pa's a good cook mostly." Nora couldn't help smiling at the boy's earnest plea. "Thank you, Joshua. That's a very kind invitation." "It's more than an invitation," Preston clarified, his blue eyes serious as they met hers. "It's a proposal of marriage and partnership. I won't pretend it's just about keeping you safe, though that's part of it." It's also because I care for you deeply and I believe we could build a good life together. Nora felt her resolve wavering. The idea of leaving Yankton, of escaping the whispers and accusations, was tempting. And more tempting still was the thought of a life with Preston and Joshua, a real home after years of uncertainty. I need time to think, she said finally. This isn't a decision to make in haste. Preston nodded, though disappointment flickered across his face. Of course, but don't take too long, things could get worse quickly. His words proved prophetic. The next morning, Nora woke to find the word "witch" painted in large red letters across the front of the boarding house. Mrs. Thatcher was beside herself, scrubbing furiously at the still wet paint. This is outrageous, she fumed as Nora joined her efforts with a bucket and rag. In all my years in Yankton, I've never seen such behavior. By midday, word had spread that several families were planning to keep their children home from school until the witch problem was addressed. By evening, the town council had called an emergency meeting. Preston arrived at the boarding house just as Nora was returning from tending to a young mother with a newborn who had developed a fever. "They're voting on whether to formally ask you to leave town," he told her without preamble, his expression grim. "Blackwell's convinced half the council you're responsible for the epidemic." Nora felt a cold fear grip her heart. "Can they do that, legally?" "They can make life impossible for you here," Preston replied. "Refuse you service at stores, turn patients away from your door." "It might not be legal, but it would be effective." Nora sank into a chair, suddenly overwhelmed. She had faced suspicion before, but never such organized opposition. "I've already packed your things," Mrs. Thatcher announced, emerging from Nora's room with her carpet bag. "Just the essentials. We can send for the rest once things settle down." "You're sending me away?" Nora asked, hurt by what felt like betrayal. "I'm saving you from a mob," Mrs. Thatcher corrected firmly. "Reverend Blackwell has worked those people into a frenzy." "Mr. Zimmerman is right, it's not safe for you here tonight." Preston crouched beside Nora's chair, taking her hands in his. "Come with us now. If things calm down, you can return. If not," he hesitated. "My offer still stands. But even if you don't accept it, you'll be safe at our place until you decide what to do next." Faced with the reality of her situation, Nora nodded slowly. "All right, but just until this madness passes." They slipped out the back way as darkness fell, avoiding the main street where the town meeting was being held. Preston had brought an extra horse for Nora, and Joshua rode behind his father as they made their way out of town. The night was clear, stars pricking the vast Dakota sky as they followed a trail north along the river. Nora glanced back once at the lights of Yankton, wondering if she would ever return. The Zimmerman homestead was modest, but well-built, a main cabin constructed of sturdy logs with a stone chimney, a small barn for the livestock, and various outbuildings. As they approached, Nora could make out a vegetable garden to one side and what appeared to be an orchard of young trees beyond. "It's not much," Preston said as he helped her dismount, "but it's ours. 15 acres cleared, another 20 of woodland beyond that ridge." "It's lovely," Nora replied honestly, touched by the pride in his voice. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area and 2 small bedrooms off to one side. A fire burned low in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow over the handmade furniture. "You can have my room," Joshua offered immediately. "I can sleep by the fire." "That's very gallant of you," Nora smiled, "but I'll take the fire. I don't want to displace you." Preston busied himself stoking the fire and heating water for tea, while Joshua showed Nora around with proprietorial pride, pointing out the improvements they had made since moving to the homestead 3 years earlier. "Pa built all the furniture himself," he explained, showing her a rocking chair with intricate carvings. "And I helped with the vegetable garden. We've got potatoes and carrots and onions stored for winter, and Ma's preserves are still good from last season." He stopped suddenly, his expression clouding. I mean they were Ma's before she died. Nora placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Your mother would be proud of how you've helped your father keep her home. Joshua nodded, blinking back tears. Pa says I'm the man of the house when he's away. I look after things. You do a fine job, Preston said, appearing with mugs of steaming tea. Now, it's past your bedtime, young man. Say good night to Miss Calloway. After Joshua had retreated to his room, a slightly awkward silence fell between Nora and Preston. The reality of their situation alone together in his home, unchaperoned, hung in the air. I'll sleep in the barn, Preston said finally, addressing the unspoken concern. You'll be comfortable here by the fire. You don't have to, Nora began, but he cut her off gently. Yes, I do. For your reputation, what's left of it, and for my conscience. His smile took any sting from the words. Besides, I've slept in worse places during cattle drives. Nora sipped her tea, grateful for his consideration. Thank you for bringing me here, for standing up for me in town. Anyone with eyes could see what you've done for Yankton, Preston replied. Those people owe you their lives, many of them. Not everyone sees it that way. Preston's expression darkened. Blackwell's grief has turned to something ugly. He needs someone to blame, and you're an easy target. Because I'm different, Nora acknowledged. Because my healing doesn't come from medical books or colleges. Because you're a woman who doesn't need a man to tell her what to do, Preston corrected. That frightens some people more than any remedy you might mix. Nora looked at him in surprise. That's perceptive. I notice things, he said simply. And I've noticed how you carry yourself, how you speak your mind, how you don't apologize for knowing what you know. It's one of the things I admire most about you. Warmth spread through Nora that had nothing to do with the fire or the tea. Most men would find those qualities troubling in a wife. I'm not most men. Preston's gaze held her steadily. And I meant what I said before. My proposal stands, regardless of what's happened in town. But I understand if you need time or if your answer is no. Nora considered her situation carefully. She had fled St. Louis to escape persecution, only to find it following her to Yankton. Where would she go next if she left here? How long could she keep running? And then there was Preston himself, a good man, kind and steady, who saw her clearly and valued her for exactly who she was. And Joshua, a boy who needed a mother's care as much as he needed his father's strength. If I accepted, she said slowly, would you expect me to stop my healing work? Preston looked genuinely surprised by the question. Of course not. Your healing is part of who you are. I'd never ask you to give that up. Even though it's brought trouble to your door, trouble comes in many forms, he replied philosophically. I'd rather face it with you than wonder what might have been. Nora's heart swelled with emotion. In Preston Zimmerman, she had found not just a protector or provider, but a true partner who respected her abilities and supported her calling. Then my answer is yes, she said, her voice steady despite the momentous nature of her decision. I will marry you, Preston Zimmerman. The joy that transformed his face made any lingering doubts vanish. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his calloused ones. You've made me the happiest man in the Dakota Territory, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I promise you won't regret this. They agreed to marry as soon as possible, partly because of propriety, given that Nora was now living at his homestead, but mostly because it felt right. There was no need to wait when they were both certain of their choice. The next day, Preston rode into Yankton to speak with the justice of the peace, leaving Joshua to show Nora around the property. The boy was ecstatic about her acceptance of his father's proposal, chattering excitedly about how they would be a real family again. Can I call you Ma? He asked as they examined the herb garden he had started on his own initiative after his first encounter with Nora. Not right away if that feels strange, but someday, Nora felt a lump form in her throat. I would be honored if you called me Ma, Joshua, whenever you're ready. The boy's face lit up. Really? Pa said I should ask you first, that it might make you sad because you don't have any children of your own yet. Your father is a thoughtful man, Nora replied, touched by Preston's consideration. But he's wrong about one thing: I will have a child of my own very soon. You. Joshua threw his arms around her in an impulsive hug, and Nora held him close, marveling at how quickly this boy had claimed a piece of her heart. Preston returned in the late afternoon with mixed news. The justice of the peace had agreed to marry them, but would not come to the homestead to do it. They would have to go to Yankton. The town meeting last night was contentious, Preston explained, his expression troubled. Blackwell and his supporters wanted to officially banish you, but cooler heads prevailed barely. There's no official action against you, but the sentiment is still hostile. Then perhaps we should wait, Nora suggested. Until things calm down. Preston shook his head firmly. The longer we wait, the more time Blackwell has to spread his poison. Besides, he added with a small smile, I'm not inclined to patience now that you've agreed to be my wife. They decided to ride into town the next morning, conduct the brief civil ceremony at the justice's office, and return immediately to the homestead. It wasn't the wedding Nora might have imagined in her girlhood dreams, but the lack of ceremony seemed fitting for a union based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than social convention. That evening, as they sat by the fire after Joshua had gone to bed, Preston and Nora spoke of practical matters: how they would enlarge the herb garden come spring, whether the second bedroom might be converted to a space where Nora could see patients, how they would manage if townspeople began seeking her healing skills at the homestead. Some will come, Preston predicted. Regardless of what Blackwell says, people need healing, and once word spreads that your remedies work, they'll find their way here. I hope you're right, Nora said. I didn't choose healing, it chose me. My grandmother always said it was a calling, not a profession. She sounds like a wise woman. She was, Nora agreed, her voice soft with memory. She taught me everything I know about herbs and healing. She called it the old knowledge, remedies passed down through generations, proven by time rather than science. Is that why people fear it? Because it's old? Nora considered this. Perhaps. Or because it's knowledge held by women, passed from mother to daughter, grandmother to granddaughter. Men don't like mysteries they can't control. Some men, Preston corrected gently. Not all of us fear women's wisdom. Nora studied his face in the firelight, the strong lines of his jaw, the kindness in his eyes, the quiet confidence he carried without arrogance. She had known him for only a few months, yet she felt as though she had found a kindred spirit, someone who saw the world as she did. No, she agreed softly. Not all men. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the first real frost of autumn silvering the grass around the homestead. Nora wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes and pinned her hair up neatly. Joshua had picked a small bouquet of late wildflowers for her, which she carried wrapped in a handkerchief. Preston, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt with his best trousers, looked at her with undisguised admiration as she emerged from the cabin. You're beautiful, he said simply. The ride to Yankton was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts about the step they were taking. Joshua rode beside them, unusually solemn in his Sunday clothes, aware of the importance of the occasion. As they approached town, Nora felt a flutter of apprehension. What if Reverend Blackwell had managed to turn the justice of the peace against her too? What if a mob awaited them? But Yankton appeared peaceful in the morning light. A few people on the street stared as they passed, but no one approached or called out. They reached the justice's small office without incident. Justice Morgan was a practical man in his 60s, with spectacles perched on his nose and a no-nonsense demeanor. He conducted the ceremony with brisk efficiency, having them recite simple vows and sign the marriage register. Joshua stood proudly as witness, his signature carefully inscribed below his father's and Nora's. There, Morgan declared after completing the paperwork. By the authority vested in me by the Dakota Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. He adjusted his spectacles. You may kiss the bride, Mr. Zimmerman. Preston's kiss was gentle and brief, mindful of their audience, but the tenderness in it made Nora's heart soar. She was no longer alone in the world. She had a husband, a stepson, a home. As they left the justice's office, Nora noticed a small crowd had gathered in the street. Her first instinct was fear had word spread of their marriage. Were these people here to protest? But then Mrs. Thatcher stepped forward from the group, a warm smile on her face and a covered basket in her hands. "Thought you might need a proper wedding breakfast," she announced, presenting the basket to Nora. "Nothing fancy, just some fresh bread and preserves, a bit of cheese, and a small cake." Nora was speechless with surprise and gratitude. Behind Mrs. Thatcher, she recognized several faces patients she had treated, neighbors who had defended her at the general store, even Dr. Holloway with his perpetual scowl softened for the occasion. "We wanted to wish you well," the doctor said gruffly. "Not all of us share Blackwell's views, you know." A young mother stepped forward, a healthy infant in her arms. "My Thomas wouldn't be here without your elderberry syrup, Miss Calloway, Mrs. Zimmerman now, I should say. I'll never forget what you did for us." One by one, others spoke up offering congratulations, expressing gratitude for her healing work, apologizing for not standing up more firmly against the accusations leveled at her. Preston stood proudly at her side, his hand warm against the small of her back. "Seems you have more friends in Yankton than we thought," he murmured. The moment of goodwill was shattered by an angry shout from down the street. Reverend Blackwell strode toward them, his face contorted with rage, a small group of supporters behind him. "Abomination," he cried, pointing at Nora and Preston. "How dare you solemnize this unholy union in our town?" Mrs. Thatcher stepped protectively in front of Nora. "Oh, put a cork in it, Elijah Blackwell. These folks have every right to marry, and we have every right to wish them well." "She's a witch," Blackwell insisted. "And now she's ensnared another innocent with her dark arts." Preston moved forward, his expression dangerously calm. "Reverend, I respect your position in this community and I understand your grieving, but I won't have you speaking about my wife that way." "Wife," Blackwell spat the word. "A mockery of the sacred institution, no godly union, this just a witch and her dupe." The crowd murmured uneasily, divided loyalties evident in their faces. Nora felt the fragile moment of acceptance slipping away, replaced by the familiar tension of suspicion and fear. Dr. Holloway cleared his throat loudly. "Reverend, I examined your wife myself. She died of influenza, the same as struck half the town. Miss Calloway, Mrs. Zimmerman, had nothing to do with it. She brought the sickness," Blackwell insisted. "Ask yourself why those who took her so-called remedies survived while others perished. Because her remedies work, you old fool, Mrs. Thatcher retorted. "My rheumatism is proof enough of that." Blackwell's face flushed dark with anger. "She'll bring God's judgment down on all of Yankton. Mark my words." Justice Morgan, who had emerged from his office at the commotion, spoke up firmly. "That's enough, Reverend. This is a legal wedding I've just performed, and these folks have broken no laws. I suggest you take your grievances elsewhere." For a moment, it seemed Blackwell might defy even the justice's authority, but then his shoulders sagged slightly. "The Lord will be your judge," he said, his voice quieter but no less venomous, "and hers." With that, he turned and walked away, his supporters trailing behind him. An uncomfortable silence fell over the remaining crowd. Preston turned to Nora, concern evident in his eyes. "We should go," he said softly. "No need to tempt fate further." Nora nodded, though her heart ached at the thought of leaving without properly thanking those who had shown her kindness. "You're welcome at our homestead," she told them, raising her voice to be heard clearly. "Any of you at any time, my healing work will continue there." Mrs. Thatcher pressed the basket into her hands. "Go on now, best to let things settle a bit, but know you still have friends here." The ride back to the homestead was subdued, the joy of their wedding day somewhat dimmed by Blackwell's outburst. But as they crossed the boundary onto Zimmerman land, Nora felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Home," Preston said simply, and the word held new meaning for Nora now. This was her home, not just a place of refuge, but a place of belonging. That evening, they celebrated their marriage with Mrs. Thatcher's feast, Joshua insisting on saying grace before they ate. His simple prayer touched Nora deeply. "Thank you, God, for bringing Miss Nora, Ma, to us. Thank you for making us a family again. And please help the people in town understand that she only wants to help them, not hurt them. Amen." "Amen," Preston echoed, squeezing Nora's hand across the table. Later, after Joshua had gone to bed, husband and wife sat by the fire, the intimacy of their new relationship both exciting and somewhat awkward. Preston broke the silence first. "I meant what I said in town. I won't have anyone speaking ill of you, not even a man of the cloth." "Blackwell is dangerous," Nora replied, troubled. "Not just to me, but to anyone who defends me. I worry about the people who stood with us today." "They made their choice," Preston reminded her. "Just as we did, people in these parts value independence. They don't take kindly to being told what to think, even by a preacher." Nora leaned her head against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solidity. "I hope you're right. Besides," he continued, his voice lightening, "we have more important things to consider now. Like where to plant that larger herb garden you want, and whether we should add another room to the cabin come spring." The practical matters of their shared life stretched before them, a future to build together, day by day. Nora felt a surge of gratitude for this man who had offered her not just safety but partnership. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now that they were spoken. "I didn't say it earlier with all the commotion, but I do love you." Preston's arm tightened around her. "I love you too, Nora Zimmerman. Have since you saved my son and didn't ask for anything in return." That night, as husband and wife shared the master bedroom for the first time, their union was sealed with tenderness and passion, a joining not just of bodies but of lives, of purposes, of dreams. The months that followed were a time of adjustment and growth for the new family. Nora expanded the herb garden substantially, planting new varieties she'd only read about in her grandmother's journals. Preston added a small room to the cabin where Nora could meet with patients and store her remedies. Joshua thrived with a mother's influence in his life once more, proudly calling Nora Ma within weeks of the wedding. As Preston had predicted, people from Yankton began to seek Nora out at the homestead, first a trickle, then a steady stream. They came cautiously at first, looking over their shoulders as if afraid of being seen. But as winter set in, and Nora's remedies proved effective against the seasonal ailments that plagued the territory, the visits became more open, more confident. Mrs. Thatcher rode out once a week for her rheumatism treatment, and to bring news from town. Reverend Blackwell continued his campaign against the Witch of Yankton, but his support was waning as more and more townsfolk experienced Nora's healing firsthand. "He's preaching to half-empty pews these days," Mrs. Thatcher reported with barely concealed satisfaction. "Seems folks prefer a healer who works to a preacher who just talks." Dr. Holloway became an unexpected ally, referring patients to Nora when his conventional treatments failed and occasionally consulting her about herbs that might complement his medical approaches. "Never thought I'd see the day," Preston remarked after one such visit from the doctor. "Science and folk medicine working together." "It's how it should be," Nora replied. "Different paths to the same goal, healing." Winter on the Dakota Prairie was harsh, with blizzards that sometimes kept them housebound for days at a time. But within the snug cabin, the Zimmerman family created their own warmth, Preston carving wooden animals for Joshua, Nora teaching the boy to identify herbs and their uses, all three reading aloud by firelight in the long evening hours. It was during one such blizzard, as February's winds howled outside, that Nora realized she was with child. She had suspected for several weeks, but wanted to be certain before sharing the news with Preston and Joshua. They were eating supper, a hearty stew that had simmered all day, when Nora decided the moment was right. "I have something to tell you both," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter of excitement in her chest. "Come spring, our family will grow by one more." Joshua looked confused for a moment, but Preston understood immediately. His face transformed with wonder and joy. "A baby?" he asked, his voice hushed. "You're sure?" Nora nodded, smiling at his reaction. "The signs are all there. I expect the child will arrive in late summer." Joshua's eyes widened as comprehension dawned. "I'm going to be a big brother?" "Yes, you are," Nora confirmed, "and a very good one, I have no doubt." The boy whooped with delight, leaping from his chair to hug first Nora, then his father. Preston, still somewhat dazed by the news, reached across the table for Nora's hand. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "For this, for everything." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Preston's hand rested protectively over Nora's still flat abdomen, as if already shielding the new life growing there. "I never thought I'd have this again," he confessed quietly. "After Eliza died, I thought that part of my life was over. That Joshua and I would go on alone. And I never thought I'd have it at all," Nora replied. "A husband, a child, a place to belong. I'd accepted that my calling meant solitude." Preston pressed a kiss to her temple. "We were both wrong, and I've never been happier to be mistaken." Spring came late to the Dakota Territory that year, the snow lingering into April. But when it finally arrived, it brought a burst of renewal that seemed to mirror the new life growing within Nora. The herb garden flourished under her care, the livestock produced healthy offspring, and the vegetable patch promised a bountiful harvest. By June, Nora's pregnancy was visible to all, her rounded belly preceding her as she moved about the homestead. The stream of patients continued, many now bringing gifts along with their ailments: fresh eggs, homemade preserves, hand-knitted baby garments. "The town has decided you're a blessing, not a curse," Mrs. Thatcher observed during one of her visits. "Even some of Blackwell's most devoted followers are slipping out here when they need help." "And the Reverend?" Nora asked, curious about her most determined opponent. Mrs. Thatcher's expression turned somber. "Still bitter, still preaching against dark arts and witchery. But his congregation dwindles weekly. I almost feel sorry for the man. Grief has twisted him into someone unrecognizable." July brought a heat wave that tested even Nora's endurance. Her pregnancy, now in its 7th month, made the simplest tasks exhausting. Preston insisted she rest during the hottest part of the day, taking over many of her duties despite his own work on the homestead. It was during one such blazing afternoon, as Nora dozed in the relative coolness of the cabin, that Joshua burst through the door, his face streaked with dirt and tears. "Ma, come quick, it's Reverend Blackwell." Nora struggled to her feet, alarmed by the boy's distress. "What about him?" "What's happened?" "His wagon overturned on the north road," Joshua explained breathlessly. "Pa saw it from the field. He sent me to get you while he went to help. The Reverend's hurt bad, Ma, real bad." Despite her condition, Nora moved quickly, gathering her medical supplies. "Saddle the mare for me, Joshua, and bring water, as much as you can carry." The site of the accident was about a mile from the homestead. As Nora approached, she could see Preston kneeling beside a figure on the ground. The wagon lay on its side nearby, one wheel completely shattered. Preston looked up as she dismounted, relief evident on his face. "Axle broke on the steep part," he explained. "Wagon flipped, threw him clear but not clean. His legs broken badly, bones pushing through the skin, and he hit his head, been unconscious since I found him." Nora knelt beside Reverend Blackwell, setting aside all personal feelings as she assessed his injuries. The leg was indeed badly broken, a compound fracture that had already lost a significant amount of blood. A large gash on his forehead suggested a serious head injury. "We need to get him to the cabin," she decided. "I can't treat him properly here." Preston nodded, already constructing a makeshift stretcher from tree branches and his shirt. "What about his leg? Should I set it first?" "No, we'll do that once we have him stable. For now, let's just try to move him without causing more damage." The journey back to the homestead was slow and careful. Joshua ran ahead to prepare a pallet by the fire, and by the time they arrived with their unconscious burden, he had water boiling and clean linens laid out. "Good work," Nora approved, noting how the boy had remembered her instructions from previous emergencies. "Now I need you to go to my workroom and bring me the yellow jar with the black lid. That's my strongest pain tincture, and the basket of bandages on the top shelf." For the next several hours, Nora worked tirelessly despite her pregnancy. She cleaned and set the broken leg, stitched the head wound, prepared poultices to draw out infection, and administered herbal remedies to reduce fever and pain. Preston assisted silently, following her instructions without question. Even Joshua did his part, keeping the fire burning and fetching supplies as needed. As evening fell, Blackwell still had not regained consciousness, but his breathing was more regular and his pulse stronger. "Will he live?" Preston asked quietly as Nora finally sat down, exhaustion etched on her face. "If infection doesn't set in, yes. But that leg may never be the same, and head injuries are unpredictable. We won't know the full extent until he wakes." "If he wakes," Preston added, voicing what they were both thinking. Nora nodded grimly. "If he wakes." 3 days passed with Reverend Blackwell hovering between life and death on the pallet in the Zimmermans' front room. Nora tended him with the same care she would have shown any patient, changing dressings, administering medicines, spooning broth between his lips when he seemed capable of swallowing. On the 4th morning, as she was checking his splinted leg for signs of infection, Blackwell's eyes fluttered open. He stared at her in confusion, then dawning horror. "Where?" His voice was a dry rasp. "You're at the Zimmerman homestead," Nora explained calmly, offering him water. "Your wagon overturned on the North Road. You've been unconscious for several days." Blackwell tried to sit up, then fell back with a groan of pain. "Why am I here? Why not in town?" "You were too badly injured to move that far," she replied. "My husband brought you here, and I've been treating your injuries." The Reverend's face contorted with a mixture of pain and disgust. "Treating me with your witch's brews, no doubt." Despite everything, Nora felt a flare of anger. "Treating you with herbs that have kept infection at bay and may well save your leg, if not your life." He turned his face away. "I'd rather have died." "That could still be arranged," Preston remarked from the doorway, his expression stony. "The North Road gets mighty little traffic. We could have left you there." "Preston," Nora admonished softly, understanding his anger but not wanting to escalate the situation. Blackwell closed his eyes, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. "Why did you help me? After everything I've said about you," the question caught Nora by surprise. It was the first time the Reverend had addressed her directly without accusation or condemnation. "Because that's what I do," she answered simply. "I heal. It doesn't matter who needs the healing or what they think of me." A long silence followed her words. Finally, Blackwell spoke again, his voice barely audible. "My wife, could you have saved her?" The question cut to the heart of his animosity, and Nora considered it carefully. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Influenza takes many forms and not all respond to the same treatments. I might have tried different remedies than Dr. Holloway, but there are no guarantees in healing, not in medicine, not in herbs, not in prayer." Tears leaked from the corners of Blackwell's eyes, tracking down into his gray beard. "I loved her for 30 years, he whispered. "When she died, something broke in me. I needed someone to blame." "And I was the easiest target," Nora concluded without rancor. "You were different," he acknowledged. "Outside what I understood, what I believed was right." Preston moved to stand beside Nora, his hand on her shoulder. "And now, after she saved your life using those same methods you condemned." Blackwell had no immediate answer. His eyes closed again, whether from exhaustion or unwillingness to continue the conversation, Nora couldn't tell. "Let him rest," she told Preston, rising somewhat awkwardly due to her pregnancy. "Healing takes many forms. Some wounds can't be treated with herbs or stitches." Reverend Blackwell remained at the Zimmerman homestead for nearly 3 weeks, his recovery slow but steady. As his strength returned, so did his interest in the world around him. Joshua, always curious about adults and their attitudes, engaged the Reverend in conversation whenever Nora allowed visitors. "Why do you think Ma's healing is wrong?" the boy asked bluntly one afternoon as he helped the Reverend move from the pallet to a chair by the window. "She only ever helps people." Blackwell, who had been largely silent on the subject since his initial awakening, regarded Joshua thoughtfully. "It's not that simple, son. I was taught that healing comes from God through proper channels, ordained doctors, approved medicines." "But Ma says all healing comes from God originally," Joshua countered. "She says the plants have power because God put it there and she just helps people find the right ones." This child's perspective seemed to give Blackwell pause. "She says that," Joshua nodded emphatically, "all the time. She prays before she makes her remedies, says we have to be grateful for the gifts God gives us in nature." The conversation troubled Blackwell enough that he asked to speak with Nora privately that evening after supper. She sat beside his chair, her hands resting on her rounded abdomen, waiting for whatever he had to say. "Your boy tells me you pray over your remedies," he began, his tone neutral. "I do," Nora confirmed. "The knowledge may have come from my grandmother, but the healing power comes from God." "I've always believed that." Blackwell studied her face as if searching for deception. "Yet you never said this in town when I accused you of witchcraft. Would it have mattered?" she asked gently. "You had already decided what I was, and faith is private to me, Reverend. Between me and God, not for public proclamations." "I was wrong about you," he admitted after a long pause. "Grief blinded me, made me lash out at what I didn't understand." Nora felt a weight lift from her heart at his words. Not because she needed his approval, but because reconciliation was always preferable to enmity. "We all do things out of pain that we might later regret," she offered. "What matters is recognizing it." Blackwell nodded slowly. "When I return to Yankton, I will publicly retract my accusations against you. It's the least I can do." "Thank you," Nora replied simply. "That would mean a great deal, not just to me but to those who have supported me despite your warnings." The Reverend's return to town was a community event. Preston transported him in their wagon, Blackwell's broken leg still splinted but healing well, his head wound now just a red line against his pale skin. Nora remained at the homestead, her pregnancy now too advanced for the jarring journey. According to Preston's account, the Reverend kept his word. At a special service attended by most of Yankton, Elijah Blackwell publicly acknowledged his error in accusing Nora Calloway Zimmerman of witchcraft or evil intent. "Grief led me astray," he told his congregation. "I sought someone to blame for a loss that was simply God's will. In doing so, I maligned a woman whose only sin was practicing healing in a way unfamiliar to me. I have experienced her care firsthand now, and I can attest that her remedies are offered with prayer and administered with God's love. I ask your forgiveness for misleading you, and hers for the harm I have caused." The retraction transformed Nora's standing in the community almost overnight. Those who had still harbored doubts now felt free to seek her healing openly. Invitations arrived at the homestead for social gatherings in town once the baby was born. Even Dr. Holloway became more public in his collaboration with her, recommending that certain patients might benefit from Mrs. Zimmerman's herbal approach. On a sweltering August evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance promising relief from the heat, Nora went into labor. Preston sent Joshua to fetch Mrs. Thatcher, who had delivered half the babies in Yankton and had insisted on attending the birth. The labor was long but uncomplicated. Near dawn, as the first rays of sun pierced the storm clouds of the previous night, Nora gave birth to a healthy son with a shock of dark hair and lungs powerful enough to announce his arrival to the entire homestead. "Samuel," she whispered as she cradled him for the first time, "after my father." Preston, who had remained by her side throughout the ordeal despite Mrs. Thatcher's attempts to banish him, looked at his son with wonder. Samuel Zimmerman, a strong name for a strong boy. Joshua, allowed in to meet his brother once Nora was cleaned up and resting comfortably, approached the bed with uncharacteristic shyness. "He's so small," he observed, peering at the swaddled infant. "Was I that small?" "Just about," Preston confirmed. "But you'll be amazed how quickly he'll grow." "Can I hold him?" the boy asked, his eyes pleading. Nora smiled tiredly. "Of course. Sit here beside me and I'll show you how to support his head." The sight of her 10-year-old stepson carefully cradling his newborn brother brought tears to Nora's eyes. This was her family hard-won, unexpected, precious beyond measure. Mrs. Thatcher, observing from the doorway, wiped away a tear of her own. "Well, that's a picture to warm an old woman's heart," she declared. "A proper family, just as it should be." The news of Samuel Zimmerman's birth spread quickly through Yankton and the surrounding homesteads. Visitors began arriving the very next day, bearing gifts and well wishes. Reverend Blackwell himself made the journey, his leg now healed enough to allow him to ride a gentle mare. He brought a hand-carved cradle, a peace offering crafted during his convalescence. "Every child deserves a special place to dream," he said as Preston set it up beside the bed. "May he grow in wisdom and strength." As summer faded into autumn, life settled into a new rhythm at the Zimmerman homestead. Nora continued her healing work, often with baby Samuel sleeping peacefully in a sling across her chest as she mixed remedies or advised patients. Preston expanded their vegetable garden and added 2 milk cows to their livestock. Joshua started attending the school in Yankton again, riding in with neighbors 3 days a week. Their home became a gathering place not just for those seeking healing, but for community celebrations and quiet social evenings. The suspicion that had once surrounded Nora had transformed into respect and even admiration. The Angel of Dakota, some called her now, a title that made her laugh but secretly pleased her. As winter approached once more, Nora sat by the fire one evening, nursing Samuel while Preston read aloud from a book of poetry and Joshua whittled a small horse from a piece of pine. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly how far she had come from the frightened woman who had arrived in Yankton little more than a year and a half ago, fleeing accusations and seeking only a place to practice her healing in peace. Instead, she had found a husband who respected her gifts, a son who adored her, a baby born of love, and a community that had learned to see beyond fear to the truth of who she was. "What are you smiling about?" Preston asked, noticing her expression. "I'm thinking about names," Nora replied. "How quickly they can change. Witch, healer, wife, mother, angel." She looked down at Samuel, now sleeping peacefully at her breast. "It's not what others call you that matters, it's what you know yourself to be." Preston set aside his book and moved to sit beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "And what do you know yourself to be, Nora Zimmerman?" She leaned into his embrace, contentment washing through her like a warm tide. "Blessed," she answered simply. "Above all things, blessed." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, blanketing the Dakota prairie in pristine white. But within the Zimmerman cabin, all was warmth and light, a family forged in adversity, strengthened by love, and blessed with the promise of many seasons yet to come.